Welcome back. The youth vote, a phrase often used during election time. It's been long thought that apathy was behind low voter turnout among young South Africans. But what's behind the so-called apathy? Well, newly released research by the Institute for Security Studies has found that it's actually disillusionment with the current political landscape. The research is titled, "Do You Want My Vote? Understanding the Factors That Influence Voting Among Young South Africans." Well, joining me in studio to talk about it and give us more details on the findings, we have Lauren Tracy from the ISS, and she's going to tell us about the study. Lauren, good morning. Good morning. And thanks for your time. What did you find? Why are our youth not wanting to vote?
So thank you for having me firstly. What we did find was that young people are getting increasingly frustrated with the socio-economic challenges that they're facing. These range from unemployment, service delivery that they're not getting, poor infrastructure, poor education, and corruption, particularly as it relates to the political elite.
Is this something you found among youth, whether they're in rural parts of the country or urban parts of the country? Did it make a difference?
So the research study spoke to youth both in urban and rural areas, and we generally found that the sentiment was the same between both groups. Obviously, generally with rural youth, they were more concerned with issues of unemployment. Poor infrastructure was a major factor for them. But in terms of corruption, we found that both in urban and rural areas, that this is something that affected both urban and rural students that participated in the research study.
So why do they not think that voting would change their situation or make these things better?
Well, what we're seeing is that young people, particularly rural youth, have already seen their parents go out and vote. And for many of them, when we had the discussions, they would say, you know, my mom is still living in a shack. She's been in the shack since 1994. I don't see any change happening from her vote. So what makes me think that my vote is going to make a difference? So these were the sentiments we were getting across, particularly when it came to rural youth. When we spoke to youth in urban areas, it was the idea that the education system was failing. You know, that they weren't getting, we see with the fees must fall protests, it started burning up then already, where they felt that the education system is just not what it could be at the moment.
So if they don't think that voting is the answer, how do they think that what do they think is the answer to changing things?
So, as I've just mentioned, they're turning more towards participating in protest action, in demonstrations, because they believe that this gets government active. This gets the challenges that they're facing addressed immediately. Whereas if they used other formal democratic processes, such as voting, they're not necessarily going to see that change immediately. This is a now generation. They want to see change right now. And when that is not happening, they would rather take to the streets and demonstrate and protest to get their voices heard.
What type of protest are we talking about? Are we looking at the likes of the service delivery protests that we've seen? Are they also believing that violence and damaging infrastructure would get them the results they want?
So interestingly not. When we spoke to young people, you know, they said that protesting was really a last resort, as much as that's the preferred choice that they would, you know, turn towards as opposed to going out and voting. But they didn't agree with the fact that these protest actions would turn violent. They wanted to just purely get their message across. They do understand that there are criminal elements that come across in it, but they don't agree with that at all.
So while they seem to be disillusioned with the government of the day, do they not feel maybe that voting for another party might make a difference as well? Is that not something that has occurred to them? Or are they also torn between that and their parents' loyalties to political parties as well?
Right, so I mean, we saw this particularly amongst your 18 to 19-year-olds. So your first-time voters seem to be changing that dynamic of not voting in line with their parents. They're more open to voting for a different political party. Amongst your 20 to 24-year-old age group, which was the age range that we looked in terms of the research study, we had 18 to 24-year-olds. What we found with the 20 to 24-year-olds, while we see shifting party allegiances, they were also not too sure what the other political parties would offer them and whether that's where they want to take their vote. Instead, many of them said they'd rather opt out of voting because they're not sure that there is a political party that meets their needs at the moment.
Okay, so it is the vote everybody is after in this election, but I suppose we'll only know how it all pans out in about a week's time. Thanks very much. That's Lauren Tracy, researcher at the Institute for Security Studies.